Hello, friends. Today, we are talking about a man who ruled over millions of people like a medieval king, who turned an entire country into a slave state and a killing ground, who sat in a castle while the people under his authority were worked to death, shot in the streets, and sent to extermination camps by the millions, and who stood at Nuremberg, broke down crying, claimed he had found God, and was hanged anyway. His name was Hans Frank. He was the Governor-General of occupied Poland. He was personally responsible for the deaths of millions of Polish citizens, including nearly the entire Jewish population of Poland. And his story is one of the most grotesque displays of absolute power and absolute moral collapse in the entire history of the Third Reich. Hans Frank was born on May 23, 1900, in Karlsruhe, in southwestern Germany. His father was a lawyer who was later disbarred for fraud. His mother eventually left his father, and the family fell into financial difficulty. It was not a stable or happy childhood. Frank studied law and was genuinely brilliant at it. He had a sharp analytical mind, an excellent memory, and a gift for argument. In another world, in another time, he might have had a distinguished legal career. But Frank came of age in Weimar Germany, in the chaos and humiliation that followed the First World War, and like so many young men of his generation, he was drawn to the extreme politics that promised to restore German greatness. He joined the Nazi Party in 1919, when he was just 19 years old. He was one of the earliest members of the movement, present at the very beginning, when it was still a fringe organization with no realistic prospect of power. He participated in the failed beer hall putsch in Munich in 1923, the early attempted coup that landed Hitler in prison and Frank in serious legal trouble. But Frank escaped significant punishment and continued his legal career while remaining deeply committed to the Nazi movement. And here is where his particular usefulness to Hitler became clear. Frank became Hitler's personal lawyer. When Hitler faced legal challenges in the late 1920s and early 1930s, when there were questions about his Austrian citizenship, when opponents tried to use the courts against him, it was Frank who defended him. Frank who argued his cases. Frank who used his legal brilliance in service of the man he genuinely worshipped. When Hitler came to power in 1933, Frank was richly rewarded. He was appointed Reich Minister of Justice of Bavaria, then President of the Academy of German Law, then Reich Minister without portfolio. He accumulated titles and positions. He wore the uniform of an SS general. He gave speeches about the new German legal order, about how National Socialist law would replace the corrupt liberal legal system of Weimar Germany. He was a prominent and enthusiastic face of the new regime, and he had no visible hesitation about what that regime was doing. The persecution of Jews, the dismantling of legal protections, the use of law as an instrument of oppression. Frank embraced all of it, but his real moment of power, the chapter of his life that defines his legacy completely and forever, came in October 1939. Germany had just conquered Poland in 5 weeks. The western part of Poland was annexed directly into the Reich. The central and southern part, a territory containing millions of Poles and millions of Polish Jews, was designated the general government. It was not incorporated into Germany. It was not given any kind of autonomous status. It was simply occupied territory, a colonial possession, a reservoir of slave labor and resources to be exploited for the benefit of the Reich. And Hans Frank was appointed its governor-general. He moved into Wawel Castle in Kraków. the ancient royal castle of Polish kings, one of the most historic and culturally significant buildings in all of Poland. Frank took it over completely. He furnished it lavishly. He filled it with stolen artwork looted from Polish museums and private collections. He hosted banquets and concerts. He lived like a king while the people of Poland were systematically stripped of everything they had. From the very beginning, Frank made clear what the general government was for. In a speech delivered just weeks after his appointment, he said that Poland would be treated as a colony, that Poles existed to serve the German war economy, that there would be no room for Polish culture, Polish identity, or Polish institutions. He said, and these are his words recorded in his own diary, which he kept obsessively throughout his time in power, that the Poles would become the slaves of the German Reich. He did not say this privately or reluctantly. He said it publicly and with evident satisfaction. The terror began immediately. The German occupation of Poland was from the very first days one of the most brutal occupations in the history of modern warfare. The SS and police units that followed the German army into Poland began executing Polish intellectuals, priests, teachers, lawyers, and politicians within weeks of the conquest. The goal was explicit: destroy the Polish leadership class, eliminate everyone capable of organizing resistance or maintaining Polish cultural and national identity. Frank enthusiastically supported and encouraged this policy. He understood that a people without leaders, without educated elites, without cultural institutions, would be easier to control and exploit. The economic exploitation was total. Polish businesses were seized. Polish property was confiscated. Poles were subjected to forced labor, dragged from their homes and sent to work in German factories and farms. Food was rationed in ways that kept the Polish population at subsistence level, while German administrators lived well. The black market became a matter of survival for millions of Poles, and Frank responded by making black market activity punishable by death. Thousands of Poles were executed for trying to feed their families. And then there were the Jews. Poland had the largest Jewish population in Europe, over 3 million people. They had lived in Poland for centuries. They had built communities, synagogues, schools, businesses, cultural institutions. They had contributed to Polish life in every field, from literature to medicine to commerce. Under Frank's administration, they were immediately subjected to brutal persecution. They were forced to wear identifying armbands. Their businesses were seized. They were subjected to forced labor. They were beaten in the streets by German police and soldiers with complete impunity. And then, beginning in 1941 and accelerating through 1942, they were murdered. The extermination camps that the Nazis built to carry out the final solution were built in the territory of the general government. Treblinka, Sobibor, Belzec, Majdanek. These were not concentration camps in the earlier sense of the word. They were factories of death, built for one purpose only: to kill as many Jewish people as possible, as quickly as possible. Treblinka alone murdered between 700,000 and 900,000 people. Sobibor murdered at least 170,000. Belzec murdered at least 430,000. All of this happened in Hans Frank's territory, under his authority, with his knowledge. Frank knew exactly what was happening. He attended meetings where the final solution was discussed. He received reports. He made speeches in which he addressed the Jewish question directly and with chilling explicitness. In December 1941, he gathered his senior administrators and told them And again, these words are recorded in his own diary, that he could not eliminate all Jews himself, but together they must find a way to achieve this goal. He spoke about the need to destroy the Jews of the general government. He used the language of extermination openly and without hesitation. This was not a man who was kept in the dark. This was a man who was an active and enthusiastic participant in planning and facilitating genocide. By the time the war ended, approximately 3 million Polish Jews had been murdered. Nearly 90% of the Jewish population of Poland was gone. In addition, between 1 and 2 million non-Jewish Polish civilians had been killed through executions, starvation, forced labor, and reprisal killings. The general government had been turned into one of the largest killing grounds in human history, and Hans Frank had ruled over it from his castle in Kraków, hosting dinner parties and recording his thoughts in his diary for nearly 6 years. As Soviet forces advanced into Poland in late 1944 and early 1945, Frank fled west. He took with him 30 volumes of his personal diary, the obsessive record he had kept throughout his time in power. It was a decision that would seal his fate at Nuremberg. When American forces captured him in Bavaria in May 1945, they found the diaries. Those 30 volumes contained more damning evidence against their author than almost any other document produced at Nuremberg. Frank had recorded everything: his speeches, his meetings, his orders, his discussions of the final solution. His own words, in his own handwriting, described his role in the murder of millions of people with a clarity that no defense lawyer could argue away. At Nuremberg, Frank underwent what many observers described as a dramatic psychological transformation. He converted to Catholicism. He expressed remorse. He wept in the courtroom. He said that 1,000 years would not suffice to erase the guilt of what Germany had done. Some people found his conversion genuine. Others saw it as a desperate attempt to find some kind of mercy or redemption in the face of certain death. The judges were not moved either way. The evidence was overwhelming. On October 1st, 1946, Hans Frank was found guilty of war crimes and crimes against humanity. He was sentenced to death. He was hanged on October 16th, 1946, at Nuremberg prison. He was 46 years old. He went to the gallows after receiving Catholic last rites. His last words expressed his hope that God would accept him. Whether God did or did not is a matter for theology. What history records is that Hans Frank was a man who used his considerable intelligence and his legal training to help build and administer a system of occupation and extermination that murdered millions of human beings. That he sat in a stolen castle and lived in luxury while the people under his authority were worked to death and shot and gassed. That he recorded his own crimes in obsessive detail in 30 volumes of diary that he then inexplicably took with him when he fled. And that he faced justice at Nuremberg and was held accountable in the only way that the enormity of his crimes made appropriate. There is one more thing worth knowing about Hans Frank. He had a son named Niklas Frank, who was born in 1939 and who grew up in Wawel Castle during the years of his father's rule. Niklas Frank has spent his adult life confronting his father's legacy with an honesty that is both extraordinary and deeply moving. He has written about his father with no sentimentality and no attempt to find excuses or mitigating circumstances. He has said publicly and repeatedly that his father deserved to hang, that what he did was unforgivable. that the children of perpetrators have a responsibility to face the truth about their parents rather than hiding behind excuses or silence. Niklas Frank is in many ways the moral counterweight to his father's life. The son who chose honesty where the father chose power and complicity and murder. Remember the 3 million Jews of Poland. Remember the millions of Polish civilians who died under Frank's administration. Remember that a man with a law degree and a brilliant legal mind looked at what was being done to the people under his authority and not only permitted it, but enthusiastically participated in planning it. Remember that evil does not require stupidity or ignorance. Sometimes it wears a suit and carries a briefcase and keeps a diary, and sometimes it sits in a castle and calls itself a governor. Thank you for watching. If this video was worth your time, please hit the like button. It genuinely helps the channel grow. Subscribe if you are not already with us. We tell these stories every single week because they matter. Drop a name in the comments if there is someone you want us to cover next. We read every single one. See you in the next video.